Good afternoon, YouTube. So the CIS team is excited to bring you the release of 2.7. So 2.7's been in the making for quite a while. It's a 3-sprint release, a lot of testing, a lot of validation. So it's highly recommended to look at this release. And so what I want to do with this video is I want to cover some of the features, some of the items that are very specific to CIS 2.7. Also talk about some of the items that you might want to be aware of. So first of all, CIS, it's a container image. And so the container image is actually UBI, which is a universal base image from Red Hat. And the CIS 2.7 has the latest the latest pull as of like last week with regards to pulling that UBI image. So that will contain all of the vulnerabilities that have been fixed up until last week. So that's a pretty good reason to move to 2.7. 2.7 has also gone through a vulnerability assessment, and we've taken a look at all the items. And I'm good to say that it's a really good release from that perspective. So I just want to let you know that it's built on the latest UBI that was pulled from Red Hat at the time of build. CIS 2.7 is also compatible and has been tested and updated against Kubernetes 122 as well as OpenShift 4.7, and we've done automation testing with OVN Kubernetes. Now I understand that OpenShift SDN is still default, and that is tested as well, but the OVN Kubernetes piece, it's the hybrid piece, has been tested using automation. And so that's quite significant. The other thing is what we've also done is we've validated the AS3 framework, which is the automation API on the back end between CIS and Big AP. It's also been updated as well. So with those three items, let's get into the big item, or a couple of the big items, and I'll also show you on my YouTube, there's a playlist that contains some of these. So policy CRD. So why is policy CRD important? Well, policy CRD is so important is that because think about all those annotations for all those custom items, those custom options, which entail policies. Policies are stuff like an HTTP, a TCP custom policy. Maybe you want to do XFF, or you want to manipulate the MTU sizes around the TCP ingress or egress. So you want to associate a custom policy to your CRD. And so this is what the policy CRD allows. It also allows for L3 and L7 security. So specifically, L3 is your AFM policies, and your L7 is your ASM policies. So let's go ahead and take a look. And so we actually have quite a bit of documentation here on our GitHub page. And if you go down to custom resource definitions, you're going to see policy CRD. So we can see what a sample policy looks like. So you can see there's your L7 WAF. There's your L3 policy. That's an L3 AFM policy. The associated logs that go with that as well. So there's your log policy for your ASM and your log policy potentially for your DOS policy. You can see that you can do custom TCP, UDP, HTTP, and HTTP2. There are a couple other ones. My recommendation is to look at the schema. And we're adding policies in 2.8 and potentially any other lingering policies that are missing. But this really provides I'd say the last piece that anybody was looking to potentially migrate from a config map to a CRD. And the nice thing about a policy CRD is that you can create one policy and reuse it with multiple virtual servers. So if you look at the virtual server example, you can see that the policy is associated to the virtual server. So you can create one or two, policies that have some items in them, maybe it's corporate governance or some type of governance or some type of application-specific set, and then add that policy to the virtual server CRD, and you're good to go. And so that's one of the final items that was really missing. We didn't really want to overload the virtual server CRD too much, so the creation of the policy CRD is kind of the way to do it. So that covers the first one. There's examples there. Notice it can be added to both virtual server as well as transport server. IPv6, and so I have a video of this, and the video will be associated with this playlist, but the support for virtual server using IPv6. So it's an IPv6 public IP for both virtual server, transport server, and service type load balancer. This is actually quite impressive. This is for Calico CNI only, right? Does not include Flannel at this time. So that's really important. If you're using an IPv6 stack and you want a big IP pool member and virtual that is IPv6 based, this is going to work. It also allows the CIS to be IPv6 enabled, so CIS can communicate with the self IP of the big IPs in IPv6. It's kind of a cool feature if that's what you're looking for. So the wildcard domain name support, I actually quite like this. This is actually really cool. So if we click on this, and if we go back to this example, let's see if we go back here, example here, and actually let's go back to here because it's, so here's an example on this. But if you're looking for the is TLS with wildcard, you see it's actually kind of nice. So this is almost like you set the wildcard, and that will handle potentially all of those subdomains that you want. You don't have to specifically create multiple of these. It's actually really nice. People have been asking it for a long time. Let's go look at one with the virtual here. See that the host is going to add all hosts. So foo.com, anything, bar.foo.com, anything in front of the foo.com will be handled. So that's kind of been waiting for a while. So I really like that. I really like that that's done. So I thank the team for that. That's something that people have been asking for. So that's another new feature in 2.7. So multiple host support. And so I wrote in, I created a document on this. This is actually cool. What this allows you to do is it allows you to group your host names, so different host names, but group them to the same virtual IP. So for example, mysite.f5demo.com and myapp.f5demo.com is housed or tied or grouped to the same public IP on big IP. You would associate them to a group. You could call that group called F5demo, and then you could move forward with that. We can take a look at an example, and an example of the grouping here. You can see here it is cafe.example.com, and the host group is called cafe. And this is actually even cooler because this is an IPAM label associated. And so you can see here t.example.com, and there's the grouping. So the IP address from IPAM that'll get associated will be the same for t.example.com and coffee.example.com. And then Big IP will use policies to differentiate based on the host name to determine what endpoint you're going to go to. And so you can see here, in this case, the endpoints are the same. And so with the endpoints be the same, we have to differentiate the path. And so there's the path. I believe at this time, and my document that I wrote has a little bit more detail, but I believe the path cannot be empty. Path has got to have it cannot have a blank path. In 2.7, at least. In 2.7.1, I believe there's enhancements to fix that. So that's actually a really cool feature as well. That's also in 2.7. In 2.7, okay, so they added also some new status. So there's some status coming back based on this GitHub issue. That's kind of cool as well. I like this tenant filtering. And this name might change, filter tenant. It's really not tenant filtering. What's actually happening here is that by enabling this feature to true, when you build your config maps, if your config map is creating multiple tenants, so for example, you've got one config map with multiple tenants, you've got another config map with multiple tenants. So for example, maybe you had 3 config maps, and they're 3 different tenants, of course. Before 2.7, what Big IP would do is Big IP would basically take those 3 config maps and put them into one JSON file and build one big JSON. The problem is that if one of those config maps errors out, or let's say, for example, you're missing a policy and AS3 generates a 422, what will happen is it's all or nothing. So the entire declaration will fail. So with this feature, what happens now is it's per tenant API calls, right? And so, for example, and it really depends upon how quick, for example, if a Kubernetes user adds them, it depends on how quick CIS picks up those config maps and makes the API call, right? So it also really depends upon how you test. But what will happen is if you have 3 and you add the 4th, it should only update the 4th. It should leave the 3 alone because there's no change, and you'll see that there's actually no change there in the first 3, and the 4th one is added. But it's kind of nice because if there's an error on one of the config maps, what will happen is that config map that has an error would come back with a 422, but the others would still be processed, and they would get configured. And then the one that had an error would potentially still get checked to see if that error is there, but the other ones the other config maps that were successful won't continue to be updated or processed, right? And so there's kind of, and also I think what's happening here, and we're going to do some more testing, we're going to do some benchmarking here, is that with this feature, we should actually get better performance, right? And we'll know in a few weeks, we should get better performance. It should be better on the AS3-based API, which should help the control plan scale a little bit better as well. So highly recommend looking at this if you're using config maps. It might be a little bit of a change. If you want to have a conversation with me to talk a little bit about how you move to this feature, kind of let me know and we can set up some time. So Ingress, name service port reference, kind of a nice fix there. This is a huge one. Like, we had a lot of problems with the waiting to get SNI support, and so without SNI support, our eDNS GTM monitors would fail, and so there's actually a bug on this one. So what we did is we introduced TCP monitors, and we fixed the HTTPS monitor with the default SNI. So that's actually really cool. Update schema change, right? And so this is really important. There was actually a mistake. We actually made this error here, and so we had to go back and fix it. And so it's really important that you get the latest schema. And I love it that they've put the latest schema in here. So it's really important that when you upgrade, you use the latest schema. And so the schema is right here. This is the latest schema of this page, and you can see 6 days ago. Very important, if you're updating the schema, please make sure you pull the latest RBAC. That's really important as well. So the cluster role bindings is really important, and you will see the reason why this cluster role binding is important for CIS if you're doing IPAM, because you need this line right here, and you need, for DNS, you can see that it's fixed to plural. And also if you're doing policies, right? So really important to pull the latest cluster role binding for CIS. This is the cluster role, this is the cluster role binding, this is the service account, and it's the map of the service account to the Big IP controller with the Big IP controller name. So make sure that your name matches, your deployment name matches this controller name, the namespace, and the service account here that are created. So it's really, really important, specifically with this release. Things will not work well, or you're going to see errors. Specifically, if you're using CRDs, you're going to see errors if you don't have the latest cluster role binding file, and if you don't have the latest schema. So it's really, really, really important that you update these items. It's a big release for us because we've made additions to the schema where we've updated the schema and we had to change the DNS name. So our goal is not to have to change the schema that often, other than make a few updates. I think this is the biggest one because of the addition of policy and then the change to eDNS. So there are some things to keep in mind there. It talks about the schema change. Quite substantial bug fixes. I mean, some really good ones to look at. Just going through the reporting of the status. CIS tries to remove. Oh, this is a good one. CIS tries to remove the non-existing monitor. That's a good fix. This support of the wildcard, allow type load balancers for different targets. That's a good one. Here's the SNI support that I talked about. A couple other ones in here as well. Enable mode and some restructure of the docs. Yep, there's some documents. There's some improvement of performance. So there's a little bit of refactoring going on here. So there's improvements while processing virtual servers, services, and endpoint resources. Huge. So this one recommended as well. Let's go take a look at some notes. So eDNS resource name is modified, so this is really important. We talked about this as well. IPv6 is validated with Calico CNI, so we talked about that. Log4j does not impact CIS and FIC, so it's really important. So there's no Log4j vulnerabilities. We talked a little bit about the vulnerabilities, about the reason to update to 2.7 to pull that latest to pull that latest UBI image. Now, I did create a document on how CIS can configure big IP to prevent Log4j vulnerabilities, Log4j attacks. That's using the latest ASM signatures. So if you want to see that, it's also in this playlist, and I'll put that in the playlist here. That was released about 2 weeks ago. If you subscribe and follow my YouTube channel, you'll actually see it there. Highly recommended. I co-presented that with Brandon Fleischer, which is a security expert in the space, and he was doing all sorts of vulnerability attacks to try and get through. ASM was unable to. So really good to look at that if you're using AFM. If you're using ASM to prevent that kind of stuff. So policy CRD integration. There's a little bit of issues here. These are going to be fixed in 271. The wildcard, when root with the wildcard, CIS not working as expected. So there's a few issues there. Also, if you're using IPAM, then you might want to pull the latest IPAM release, which is always good as well. So when we updated CIS, we also updated IPAM as well. Let's go to the IPAM directory. So we'll go to F5 networks. So we can actually see the IPAM directory here. And this is the 016. This is the latest IPAM release. And so here is the IPAM release that you want to use with 2.7. You definitely want to use these two together. So it might be a little tricky when you update. There might be a little fiddling around because of the. So it's there actually is a procedure that if you are updating, just ping me. I can get you that procedure. But you should be able to go to this one as well, these two as well. Let me show you. There is a schema update as well. Let's see. I think we created a FAQ. Here we go. So this is an FAQ that was created a couple days ago. Here we go. This is really important. Okay, cool. So we created this FAQ. So if you're going from 15 to 16, IPv6 is included with this. So this needs to be updated in the schema. So you can kind of see there that if you're going from 15 to 16, because IPv6 is secluded in FIC, schema needs to be updated, right? So really important. If you're going from 14 to 15 or 14 to greater, there's a schema change. So the CRD is renamed. So ensure delete of the older. So what you have to do is you have to actually go in. There's actually the IPAM actually saves information as a CRD. So you have to go in and remove this, right? This F5 IPAM CRD, and then update the cluster role bindings, right? So it's not that easy. I created a video on this. If you need help, reach out to myself or reach out to one of us. We can help you with this. We can set up a call to help you migrate. We shouldn't see a lot of them because there's a lot of deployments where organizations have started to test but haven't actually gone production. I think a lot of people are waiting for 2.7 and the new year, so we're going to start to see it more and more. And that's why I think this 2.7 hitting on the first of the new year is actually quite critical. So that's kind of where we are. We've started to work on 2.7.1. 2.7.1 is a maintenance release. It's basically a little bit of refactoring, bug fixing. 2.7.1 will be out in approximately a month. 2.7.1. Now it's a 2-sprint release, and so that's what's going on right now. So that will provide some of the stabilities for some of these issues that were in 2.7, and then we're going to start working on 2.8 in a month from now. So appreciate the time. If you have any comments, please let me know. Please subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much.